On today's episode from the Great Central Fire, it was an absolute pleasure for me to sit down and visit with our current CEO and current president, Hugh Haller, longtime friend, a longtime Kooch alum, and we covered some great topics. Starting with John Holden. He grew up right close to John. A trip with John down the Pigeon River. He actually mentioned my father and his influence, and tells a funny story about an obstacle course on the island. We shared stories about our friend Steve Heinley, a trip he had with Steve back in the early 80s. Talks about how he reconnected and got back involved with camp after a long time away. We covered the background on the Native American program and the changes being made. And we also covered what lies ahead and the strength of where camp is today. Our Urban Wilderness is a great program he covered. And he closed with some important thoughts about changes in the leadership. So sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy this great episode with Hugh Haller. Hello, everybody. From the Great Central Fire. This will be a great one today, certainly for me. We have a guest on today that many of you know, and I've known for a while, was a camper for a while, and we'll get into all this, but I want to welcome our current president and CEO of the Camping and Education Foundation, Hugh Haller. Hugh, great to have you on today, buddy.
Oh, Jeff, it's an honor to be on and just share this platform with you, my friend.
Oh, yeah.
Listened to a couple of these podcasts already, and you're killing it. So I know that folks are enjoying it, and it's just great to have you back in the fold. So thank you.
Yeah, well, it's great to tell stories. I mean, I could go on, and what we're going to get into is right around my younger days, but I remember all of it. We're going to talk about it. I do want to mention, Hugh, you started as a camper in 1970. I don't want to age or anything, but I was 2. but no, seriously, from 70 to 76, then you were on staff for a few years. Why don't you just kind of go in about, and I know there's a lot of family histories with the Haller. I know this, but go in about how your family came in and across camp and how it all started for us.
Certainly. Well, it began in Cincinnati, Ohio. I think I was 6 or 7, and I got involved in a Wasaka Boys Club. And that came about through my uncle. I know you know my cousin, Rick. Who's been a part of camp for a long time, and it's great to have him back. But Rick's father, Richard Haller, my uncle, my father's brother, was the one who first introduced me to the organization and John Holden through the Wasaka Boys Club. And I got involved in that one, as I said, when I was 6 or 7 in the middle 60s. And Wasaka was, best way to say it or way to think about it was we thought of ourselves as a kind of renegade Boy Scouts. And so many stories and so much fun, so many great counselors that I know the names of, going all the way back to, obviously people like BJ and Tad Schroeder and the Keller brothers and on and on and on. And it was such a brilliant idea. And it actually didn't start, it wasn't John's brainchild. It actually goes all the way back to Jim Stone. And that was passed on to Bernard Mason. And then John took it over, and John ran it for a number of years. And certainly when I was there as a kid, and it was such a great idea because not only did it kind of keep us off the streets and get us involved in sports and wilderness camping, because we did, weekend canoe trips and Indian dancing and crafts and everything. But it was a wonderful feeder program into Camp Kooch. And that was really the brainchild behind it. And that was what John had envisioned. So he recruited so many boys out of the Wasaka Boys Club that went up to camp. And so that's for me where it began. John, honestly, became a second father to me. I grew up 2 blocks from his house. And every day on the way home from school, would stop off and we'd shoot a little pool. He taught me how to play a pool and helped me with my homework. I can't say that my own relationship with my dad, like many of us, was all that great back then. So John kind of stepped in and was such an influence in my early life. And then as I got a little older, and I think it was right around the time that you come into the junior camp, because I wasn't a prep. I started as a junior John got me up to camp, and and that began just an amazing journey for me. And I think back to those days, you know, camp was everything for me in my life, and all the guys that I grew up with, Steve Eha, Jay Stair, John Wildman, Andy Rodimus, Matt Golub, on and on and on, Steve Merritz, and so many great counselors, Rich Thompson and Mike Ecker, Brad Smith, Mark Smith, Archie Smith, gosh, Rob Schoss. I saw Rob Schoss. I hadn't seen Rob Schoss in 50 plus years, Jeff. And, one of the best parts of my role is, and this is just, not only telling stories, but actually going and seeing people. I connected with Rob. He's down in Texas. And Rob was one counselor that I remember, above many, just because the guy was so friggin' hilarious. And he was, he came to camp out of Colorado. Holden had recruited him to help run the backpacking program. And Shosh was definitely, a hippie type, long hair and goofy and just a lot of fun. And so I found him in the database and reached out to him and went to see him last year. And now he's just an old hippie and it's still as funny and hilarious as ever. But that's such a great part of this role, is reaching folks that, for whatever reason, aren't engaged, aren't involved, aren't connected. And you think, hell, they were only at camp for a year or two. They must not have liked it. And you walk into their office, you walk into their house, and it's a shrine to Kooch, and they got their token cards and their stories, and bring out the Camp K and, their beaver patch. And you're like, wow, yeah, you actually did really love this. And then they go on and go, damn, like, why didn't I come back? Like, why the hell did I take that lifeguarding job? That was, I think back on it, and I should have come back to Kooch. So those days were so memorable for me. Jeff, this, that when we were there, it was much simpler, right? Mean, there were maybe 100 to 120 kids there, and we were there for the whole summer.
Yep.
There was no 4-week program. There was no backpacking. There was no bicycling, although that did come in while I was there for a couple of years. But what? We had one phone. We had one Model A Ford truck. Lulu would call us from the office, and it was heaven. And to grow up there and spend your summers up there and learn all about the wilderness, learn about our Native American program, all the trips that I took. I think back some of the ones that were most memorable for me, going both to the Fond du Lac and the Seal with Bob Meek, those were amazing trips. Bob still reminds me to this day that I wrapped a canoe on the Seal, and I don't think he'll ever let me forget that one. But one of my most fond memories of trips was with John. I was his assistant, and I think it was one of John's very last trips. We went to the Pigeon River, and I'll never forget this as long as I live. I'd come across a portage trail, and I was on my way back, and I see this Grumman canoe trucking along, and it's pretty low to the ground, and I'm thinking that's got to be Holden, because it's like, John,
right,
is as large as he was in stature, he was actually pretty diminutive, right? And all of a sudden he trips over a bog or something. The canoe goes down, and it's just flat on the ground, right? I mean, it's just flat, perfect flat on the ground. And I'm like, oh my God, John's down. And I run to go help him, and all of a sudden I hear this grunt, and slowly the canoe just rises up, and there's John, pipe in his mouth, not missing a beat, and off he goes. So amazing place, amazing memories.
It's great too when you go meet with people, Hugh. I mean, this too. It's like the conversation picked up from 40, 50 years ago, like it never left off. I mean, it's right back into your point too. I've met with some people myself that were there for a year or two, and they remember everything and absolutely loved the place. And, I just, talking about changes too, you're talking about some old, I jotted down some things, that some people may not know, that the shop used to be right where the front bench is there, right when you walk on, right next to the welcome center there. It used to be there.
Right.
I mean, people don't, how about the old tennis courts down where the trip center is now, where they do the felling contest for the woodcraft for the staff, where they chop the logs off. The trip center's changed twice. And the Marine Railway for the big boat. We used to pull the big boat up right on the sailing beach with the railroad.
Exactly.
I mean, all these little things that have changed. It's just kind of interesting to see. Yeah.
Oh, there's no question. I mean, when you think back to our day, the basketball courts were kind of center of camp because you not only had the basketball courts where your dad and Lineberger and others held court right after dinner, and just a massive basketball game, but the horseshoe pits were right there. The box hockey was right there. The tetherball courts were right there. And that was center of camp. And the shop, as you stated, there were benches out in front, and when everybody who wasn't playing would gather there and watch, and there was just so much activity right there. And, I think of those times and those memories. I mean, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about your dad. I mean, Bugs was, larger than life for me as a camper growing up. He ran the junior camp. BJ ran the intermediate camp when I was there. But your dad, a lot of tough love.
Oh yeah.
Which I needed for sure. And one fond memory I had of your dad was, I don't know whose idea it was or who did it, but we established an obstacle course that went all the way through the back of the island, through the swamp. It was tough, man. I mean, it was rigorous, and it was a punishment, just to say it for what it is. And, I got in more trouble, than most. And, next thing I know, one morning, before I know it, it's 4:30 in the morning and the whistle goes off and your dad bursts into the cabin and he's yelling at me and the rest of the guys like, oh, let's get up. We're running the course. It's all Haller's fault. And so we're making our way through this obstacle course, and it's a lousy day and the weather's just terrible. And here I am coming down the bear trail, neck and neck with your dad. And we're in front. We're leading everybody. And I swear to God, Jeff, we're jostling each other. Like, there's no way I'm going to let your dad win. And of course, there's no way he's going to let me win. And literally, we're elbowing each other. We get right to the end of the bear trail, right where it comes into the ball field. And we're both like diving across the finish line.
That's classic.
And when I came back to camp many years later in his role, it was like literally the first thing your dad said to me. Hey, I won that, right?
He was competitive till his last days, I know.
Oh my God.
But he loved it up there. And it's, I know it's my dad, but it's been great. You don't know how he was received. You just don't know, what people thought. I mean, I'm sure there's some that didn't care for the way he corrected him or whatever, but everybody so far that I've caught up with have said how big of an influence he was on them and how much they appreciated tripping with him. So it's been great for me to hear. And there's a lot of people like that up there though. And they're still there, and they're still having a great impact on kids and trips and things like that. That is still going on today, which is great to see. You talked about Holden. When I was a kid, one thing I remember was going to his home in Indian Hill for the Christmas Eve party. I had to be 13 before I went there. That was such a great time. And then our family took it on. And a funny story about that one, when John passed away, we started hosting the Christmas Eve party at our house, my parents' house in Cincinnati. And Buzz Ecker and Bill Easley came to the party. And they were a little late. And Buzz shared with us that they were at the house, two doors down the street at a party, and were there for 2 hours having beer. And then Buzz looked at Bill and said, hey, do you know anybody here? Bill said, no. So Buzz asked, is this the Coleman residence? And they said, no, that's 2 houses down. So they were a little late to the party, but they eventually got there. But also at John's, Hugh, maybe share, I don't know as much, but I know he had a garage in the back with all the ski equipment in there.
Yes. Keewaydin Ski Club.
Yes.
Which John started with Ed Betts. For those out there who recall Ed, I think if you look up in the dictionary and you look under the word gentleman, Ed's name would be right there. Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I've ever met a man more distinguished, more polished than Ed, and was a great influence for me when I came back into this role and offered a tremendous amount of advice. But yes, Ed started Keewaydin with John. It actually was Ed's influence that allowed Keewaydin to be co-ed. Ed really wanted to be a co-ed ski club. And, obviously up into that time, anything that we did with Saka and Kooch were all boys. And I think that was sort of the forerunner, maybe, when you think about it, of a Gitche that way. But Keewaydin was just a lot of fun. gosh, I don't even know if I remember how old I was, probably, 10, 11, 12 when I started. And Jeff, I mean, we're talking step-in bindings, wood skis,
Right.
spring bindings, the whole thing. And we went all through the Midwest in those days. We'd go up. I learned to ski up in Boyne
I was
Mountain.
there.
Actually, I'm taking my kids there this Christmas to revisit it. But we went to Boyne. We went to Devil's Cascade, Devil's Head. We went to Cabaret, all the places in the Midwest. And then, I never went west. I don't know if I was out of it that time or what, but then they started going west.
I went there a couple times on that. The Snowmass, they had a house out there.
Exactly, BJ. Yep. All those guys. But one thing that was just, you're another great memory there is just John, picking us all up in the Green Monster. He'd load us all up on Friday right after school, and we'd take off and drive where we were going, and then ski for a couple days hard and have a lot of fun, and then back in the Green Monster and come on home. And John would sit up there in the front seat with his pipe, and just a wonderful time. So Key Waden spread its wings throughout Cincinnati. There's a lot of boys and girls who were a part of that Key Waden Ski Club that never actually came up to camp, but definitely had a strong presence here in the Cincinnati area. That's the kind of program I wish we could revive.
Right.
But little tough today's given the entry price for skiing.
Right,
But at least we have Boys of Winter. I don't know if you
right.
heard, we're having Sons of Winter now. I don't know if you.
I did hear that. I did hear that.
But yes.
I don't know who shared. I was down at the camp office not long ago. Someone shared that with. Oh, Tim Downey. Tim Downey
Correct.
shared that with me. Yes.
Yes, Mick Guillen, who is a current Kooch staffer, very creative guy, very, very creative young man. And he dreamed up this idea of Sons of Winter. So it's kind of at the intermediate and senior level of campers. And I think it's over President's Day weekend. And he's got a group of about 14, 16 young men. They're going to go up to the island and experience the PG version of Boys of Winter.
No, it's actually, that is who told me about it, was him. I saw him at the camp event in Cincinnati there on the 12th.
Right.
And he was showing me that. I met him and we had a great talk. That's who was showing me about all that. So
who knows? Maybe it will lead to future ski trips in Minnesota. Who knows? But anyway, it's a lot of fun.
So, 6-7 years as a camper, you were on staff for a couple of years, Hugh. You came back in '83, which happened to be Heinlei's first year, which was kind of interesting. And then you were gone for a while.
I got to tell you a story about '83, though.
Okay.
I wrote this one down, and it sticks in my memory because it involves one of our dear friends, Steve Hainle. In '83, I came back for 1 year because Tim had reached out to me. I was traveling and doing things. I was overseas for a while. I was in the Peace Corps, and I was kind of in between jobs. And Tim reached out to me and said, "Hey, can you come up and lead a backpacking trip?" And I'm like, "Tim, I don't know the first thing about backpacking." I said, "All my days were canoeing. I don't even."
Yeah.
Said, "You're fine." Like, okay, I got nothing to do. I'll come up. So came up, and there were 2 trips going to the Wind River. Gary Lineberger was leading one, and I was leading the other. And turns out that Randy Alden, who I know was my assistant. Thank God, because he knew a heck of a lot more about backpacking than I did. I think I was just there because I was 21. And one of my campers was Steve Hainle. So we had a great trip, fabulous mountains and, great weather. And although I remember us getting caught in a windstorm where we hid in a crevasse for a couple hours, so we thought we were going to get blown off the side of the mountain. But at any rate, great trip. We get back, we were based out of Lander, Wyoming.
Yeah.
And in those days, we would drive a van out
Mm-hmm.
and then leave it there, the trailhead, and then come back. So we get back to the parking lot, and I go to the van and open it up. It's dead. Battery's just dead. And I'm like, oh, Jesus. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And Randy's like, what are we going to do? I was like, I don't know. Hey, take the kids into town, buy them a Coke, go to a movie. I don't know. I got to figure this thing out. So anyway, I don't know if I'm allowed to tell this story on the air, but I think I'm all right. I got to figure something out here. So I literally started going around the parking lot looking for a van that was similar to ours
That had a battery.
and had a battery, and sprung the lock, got it open, took the battery out, obviously took the dead one out, put it in ours, charged it up, drove the van into town, bought a battery, and came back, put the battery back in, and then got the kids and went home. So I come back. When I came back to the organization many years later, Wiper, who was director at the time, he meets me at the dock, and the first thing he says to me, "Do you remember when you stole that battery out of that van?" And I had completely forgot about it.
Yeah,
completely forgot about it. But Steve, as you know, remembers everything.
Oh, yeah.
He could tell you every trip, every portage trail, every campsite, every fish he caught. And yeah, he didn't let me live that one down. So
yeah,
anyway.
he's one of the best ones I've ever tripped with by far. He's a great one. So
Yes, he is.
well, so you were gone for a little bit. I mean, in '83, you can get into this and share this a little bit, but then you came back in this role. Now, what year was it that you came back in as the president and CEO?
So it was in 2007.
So okay.
Started in August of 2007. The little story behind that. So yes, I was gone for quite some time, probably about 25 years. And true story, my wife, Alice Peacock, who I know you know, singer-songwriter, and she was out in LA recording an album, and we were flying home across the Rocky Mountains, and I had the window seat, and I was lost in thought, and she elbows me and says, "Where are you? You seem very distant." I'm like, I just, come on, we just spent like 3 weeks in LA, and it's like not a city I'm super fond of. And, I, just, just dreaming. And she's like, "Well, if you could be anywhere right now, where would you be?" And I don't know, maybe back at my old camp. And she's like, "What?" She said, "You never talk about that." And according to her, for the next 2.5 hours, I literally didn't stop talking until we landed in Chicago, where we were living at the time, talk about camp and old camp days. And she's like, "Well, why don't you reach out? Why don't you reconnect with them?" And I was like, been there, done that, whatever. Anyway, she kept it up. And literally, like for a couple of months, she kept bugging me about it. And so finally, one day I picked up the phone and I called Hank Brightwell, who I was still very good friends with at that time. And just, hey, what's going on with camp? And he said, "I'm not really sure, but the guy I believe in his chair is Jim Shook." And Jim and I were best of friends, grew up together at camp. And so probably another couple of weeks went by, and then I picked up the phone and I called Jim, and first he picks up the phone and, "Hey, Jim, it's Hugh." And he's like, "Who? You? Where the hell you been for the last 25 years?"
Right.
And I'm like, "Well, Jim, phone works both ways, dude. Like, where you been?" Anyway, I mean, we then picked up immediately, right? Like you just said, earlier, and didn't miss a beat and reminiscing and everything. And he's like, "It's pretty coincidental that you're calling me right now, because we are just starting to think about putting together a role for a CEO to overarch the organization. We just started this girls' camp, and we need some help with that, and need a little help with Kooch and so forth and so on. And we're not really sure even what the role looks like. And frankly, he didn't sell it very well." And, I kind of like, "Would you be interested?" I was like, "I don't know. Anyway, that was it. And I think I might have said at the end of the conversation that if you ever kind of get it together, or you have a job description, maybe shoot it to me. But, I'm happy with where I am, what I'm doing." And anyway, I didn't hear from Jim for 6 months. And then one day, ding, in my inbox, and there's this email from Jim and a job description of the role. And I took a look at it, and I was like, well, I owe it to myself to, at least, submit a resume and a cover letter. So I did that. And next thing I know, I get a call from Tom Martella, who was leading the search. And
Okay.
they fly me to Cincinnati, and I felt like I was in the Inquisition, and in the room with the spotlight over my head, and there's all my old buddies, and some I knew and some I didn't know. including people like, at that time, Jeff Wilson, who was chair of the board, maybe the smartest man I've ever met in my entire life. Just, God rest his soul, just incredible, incredible man. Ed Betts was on that committee, and all the guys I've mentioned, Jay Stair, Kathy Dix, who I'd never met before at that time, George Simmons, who I actually didn't know at the time, and on and on and on. And, I went through the process of 3 or 4 rounds of interviews, and before I knew it, I'm up at camp for the last round. And this is the best part of this story, was because this led to a lifelong friendship. I'd gone through a bunch of interviews up at camp over a weekend, and I went over to Thunderbird just to kind of decompress and think about the whole process. And I'm sitting on the deck, and I look over, and there's this guy, and never met him before, didn't know who he was, but sort of scruffy looking, and on an old ratty Kooch hat, and maybe the weirdest food plate I've ever seen. You know where this is going. He's got some olives and some eggs and, I don't know, some peanut butter, and then he's got like a martini glass and the whole bit. And
you want me to guess?
Go ahead.
It's got to be Tom Dupree.
100%. And I walk up and I go, I didn't even say anything. He's like, I know who you are. He said, I've been behind the scenes of this whole process.
Oh, yeah.
And he starts asking me questions, and then starts, giving me some ideas and thoughts and advice. And honestly, Jeff, that started a friendship that, lasted, we lost Dupe about 5 years ago now. So, 15 years of just an amazing friendship.
Yeah.
And was so helpful for me as a mentor, advice, helping me through, those early days, and especially with the development of Ogeechee Dakwe, which, was a big impetus for me in terms of coming back and getting into the role.
Well, I could go into a bazillion stories about Doopy, but I'm going to hold those back, and they're all hilarious. But so, Hugh, when we were there, we had Camp Kooch. It was the one director. That was it. It was a one-person show. They did all the fundraising, recruiting, all of it, the whole shooting match. And
Yep.
Now here we go with now you're getting into a new role, and you saw it the way it was before. And now here you come in with the CEO, with now another entity under the umbrella, so to speak, with Ogeechee starting up. I'll let you go from here and cut it loose to you. The difference, the changes, in this whole new structure of how it's all, what were the challenges? Were there challenges? I'm sure that's good and bad with anything like this that you get into. It's going to be different. And I'm sure it was a little different setup than what we were all used to.
It was. And yeah, there were a lot of challenges in the beginning. I think just from the outset of, we're going to get into this a little bit later too, just with some of the modern challenges. But, Kooch, I think one of the things that people love about Kooch is the fact they think of it up there and on Rainy Lake, and it's, isolated, and it's preserved and kind of protected from outside influence. And we all want to think, hey, we can come back and, nothing's changed. And to a large degree, nothing has. And when it would come to the program and the influence and the impact it has on kids, nothing has changed. If anything, it's only gotten better and has more. But at that time, certainly the current board recognized that we needed to evolve. And we were becoming a little bit of a dinosaur. And if you go back to that period, which was, 2007, 2008, and you were to look at the rest of the industry and look at the really excellent wilderness organizations that were out there, by that time, they all had really evolved. And not only did they have a boys camp, but they had a girls camp. And they also had some additional programming, like year-round programming as well. So I always say this, that I don't think anybody can touch us when it comes to our tripping ethic and our ability to trip, especially given where we're located. But as an organization back then, we were a little behind. And to go back to John for a second, and not everybody knows this, but you know, a Gitchy, and not so much a Gitchy, but a girls' camp, that was John's vision.
Right.
John, you go all the way back to, you know, the early 80s and even into the mid 70s when I was at camp toward the very end. And then when I was on staff, there was already a lot of talk about starting a girls' camp.
Mm-hmm.
And that was John's vision. And when I came back, one of the first things that I did was lock myself in a closet out on Northland Boulevard where our old office was, where Tim had set it up and maybe the rent was $100. I mean, this thing was just like, I mean, you talk about no frills, just classic Tim.
Oh yeah.
And I locked myself in a closet and just read through all the back minutes and all the back board meetings. And what I uncovered more than anything, or as much as anything, was John's desire to have a girls' camp.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all there and it was all memorialized. He had plans. I have an old folder of John's where literally he had the whole thing laid out. And he was definitely ahead of his time. And I don't think it was maybe as well thought out as it could have been in terms of, you know, there was going to be some commingling and conflict with the boys' camp. And obviously that was never going to happen. So, you know, the board shut it down many times. Family that I know you know really well, the Lemkemeyer family.
Yeah.
Ned Lemkemeyer was the chair at that time. And Ned couldn't be at this board meeting where they were bringing up the girls' camp again. And I guess they had to call Ned. I don't know if he was in St. Louis or Florida off on business, and they had to call Ned to cast the deciding vote. And he voted against it. And so it was voted down. And when we finally got the girls' camp up and going, I know that Ned, I remember visiting him years later as we were looking to put it all together and raise the money. And he's like, you know, that was one of my greatest regrets in life. And I'm so glad that you guys finally got there. Another guy, Harry McNeely. I know you remember the McNeely family.
Oh, yeah.
I just visited Harry last summer. Harry is 101 years old.
Oh, gosh.
101. He was 100 on our 100th and is still engaged and vibrant. And he's participated in some of our most recent efforts and campaigns. But he is another one. He was dear friends with John. And again, when we voted the girls' camp down, he kind of walked away for a period of time. So, you know, back to John's vision. It was John's vision. And I brought up a name earlier, George Simmons. I didn't know George when I was at camp. Hard times never crossed. But when I, you know, was lucky enough to get this role, one of the first people I sat with was George. And George told me this really powerful story. About John, and how John told George on his deathbed, "Don't forget about the girls."
Yeah, we talked about that on when we had him from the Great Central Fire.
So, you know, it's sort of the hair went up on the back of my neck when he told me that story. And honestly, Jeff, when I heard that, I felt like, okay, there's a reason why I'm in this role, and it's to complete John's vision.
Yeah,
because John was so influential in my life as a kid, and so we took it from there. And you know, I mentioned the minutes and all that I had found on John's ideas. And there was one particular letter that John had written to the board about how important it was to start this girls' camp from a strategic standpoint. And so I took that letter when we started to put this whole process together, because, you know, when I came in, Agitchi was already started, but it definitely was, you know, in a bit of a state of, I don't know if chaos is the right word, but just we needed a plan. I mean, we didn't really have a really strong vision yet for what it was going to become.
it was young still.
It was young.
It was still young.
I mean, it was young, and all the people who were a part of that early process, George and Janet Vanderbark, Jay Stair, Jim Shook, Steve Shook, all those. I mean, they had a great founding committee. Rich Thompson's another one, obviously Tim. But it was young, and not everybody was on board. I mean, it really hadn't been, you know, I think maybe sold as well to the communities it could have been, or there definitely was just, you know, confusion. What is it really going to become? And most importantly, they weren't sure where it was going to be.
Correct.
There was a temporary lease, obviously, on the Rainy Lake Lodge property, but you know, that wasn't necessarily the original vision as what was going to end up. So, you know, my first charge was to really figure this out. And okay, you know, what is the plan, and what is going to be the best way to do this? Where does it go? What does it look like? All these different things. And back to Dupe, great story with Tom. So, you know, I had committed to the organization that what I felt was most important from a fiduciary responsibility was to look at our properties first. Before we said we were going to go off to another part of Minnesota or Wisconsin and, purchase land and spend millions of dollars, let's look at what we own first and see if that's viable. And as I mentioned, Tom had already become a great friend. He was advising me on some of this. So Tom and I came up to camp in March. And this would have been I guess this would have been in 2008. Yeah, March of 2008. And Tom rented a little prop plane and we flew over the island and all the properties up there that we currently own to see what could be viable. And then after we did that, we spent a day hiking all through the island, every part of it, to see if it was feasible. And ultimately, for a number of different reasons, decided that it just wasn't going to work. And some of that was proximity to the boys' camp. Some of it was what it would have taken from an infrastructure standpoint to really build something out. So once we did that, then we went over to the old Rain Lake Lodge property where the girls' camp was at that time, and looked at that. And we're, going through all of that. And, it was obvious we didn't have a lot of acreage there. But the big thing more than anything was, you're going to have a camp, you got to have a ball field, right?
Right.
You got to have some flat space. And the only flat space at that time behind the old Rain Lake Lodge was the leach field. And there was about, I don't know, it had to be at least a couple of feet of snow on the ground at the time. And so we're tramping around and, as Tom's got, his one leg and he's got his prosthetic and he's got his ski poles and we're tromping through the snow and we're behind the lodge. And next thing you know, Duke just takes off. Like he just takes off like a bat out of hell. And he's going across this leach field with his ski poles and he's trucking along. And I'm yelling after him, Tom, slow down. Next thing you know, he literally pulls out of his prosthetic leg and the stump is sticking in the snow and he keeps going.
He doesn't care.
And he's like, Hugh, I see it. I'm like, what the hell is he talking about? Like he turns around, he's like, this is it. This is the ball field. We just got to clear out some of the woods and make it a little bigger. And this is it. And then, I'm like, okay. And then we'll throw the cabins up in the hills and we got a camp. Well, we go back to the old Helloyd property, which was right next door. And we had met Bert Helloyd and we're there and we're just sort of thawing out. And next thing I know it, my phone rings and I answer and is this Hugh? Yeah. Hey Hugh, this is Brett Botnick. I know you don't know me from Adam, but I've lived up here my whole life and I'm a realtor here in town. And I was dear friends with Tommy Walters and Tom Cotola. And my father, Doc Walters, was your doc. Not my father. Tommy's father, Doc Walters, was, the camp doc for so many years. And I know you remember Doc Walters.
Oh, yeah.
Literally had the black bag and he'd come and, visit the whole bit. And he's like, well, here's the thing. I owe it to Doc and my whole life, frankly. And that's why I'm making this phone call. I guess when Brett was a little kid, he always wanted to come to Kooch as a camper. And he was in school one day and they were doing a fitness test and he collapsed on the mat and they took him to the nurse's office and they called Doc Walters in. He checked him out and it seemed like everything was fine. Thought maybe he just fainted and got a little dizzy. And then I guess at the very end of the examination, he noticed a little red spot on Brent's knee. He said, hey, do you mind if I just prick that? So he took a little blood sample, took it back to the lab. Turned out that he had bone cancer and they amputated him almost immediately. Otherwise, not would he just lost his legs, he would have lost his life. So he said, I've always had this fascination and sort of almost like a love-hate with Kooch because I always wanted to go there, but obviously I couldn't. So I wanted to call you because I know how much this place means to the community, to myself, to all of you. And I know you guys are thinking about trying to establish a girls' camp here permanently. Well, I just want you to be aware that the house you're standing in right now and all the land and property around it is going to come up for sale. It had been up for sale years before at a much higher price. It was still, expensive. He said, but I've got developers in my office right now and they're circling and they're trying to figure out, how they're going to buy this and they're going to carve it up. And, if you're thinking about having a girls' camp here, there's no way that's gonna, if that happens, there's no way you're gonna be able to do it. I hang up the phone, I turned to Dupe, I said, Dupe, we got to buy this thing now.
And he said, yeah.
and he said, yes. And
Yeah.
that was the beginning,
Yeah.
and then from there, we went on and we put the plan together and, so many people were a part of that collaborative process. Dave Serrano, who is he's the lead land surveyor in International Falls, who helped us with the site plan, David Nyland, and I could tell a whole story about that, but maybe for another time, that helped us put the, really, had the vision for the architecture, and then all the people that had got involved and helped and supported from, John Barry, obviously Rich, the Pull family were very, very involved in that. One guy that I have not mentioned, Jeff, that had a huge influence on me when I was a kid growing up at Kooch, but also was super involved in helping put this all together, was Rich Thompson. Rich was my idol, I guess I would say, when I was a kid growing up, and just had such a admiration for him as a kid and admired everything he did. And especially when he and Ecker and all those guys went off and did the Arctic, which inspired me 50 years later,
right,
to do the same. But Rich was so helpful, not just in helping build it, but he was the one who helped us put the land swap together.
Yeah.
That allowed us to acquire about another 30 acres, which kind of gave us the wilderness border to build it out. But, I will tell you that going all the way back to when I had those first interviews up at camp, I brought Alice, my wife, with me, and, to see, the opportunity to really develop a girls' camp through her eyes and the impact that could have on young women. And now knowing how involved she is, but also my daughter, that was a huge part for me to really get back involved. And then just to bring it all forward and bring it into the modern day. And, so many great camps that are out there, Keewaydin and Dudley and Shawanki and all the ones that are on the East Coast, they all started, it's just like us, as a mom and pop.
Yeah.
Right around the turn of the century. And whatever their competitive advantage was, that's what they built off. And for us, obviously, it was access to the Canadian wilderness. But at some point, you got to professionalize, because it's a different world. And with all the risks that you have, whether that's insurance, risk management, leadership challenges, all of it, obviously having, 2 camps, more than double the infrastructure and all the logistics. I mean, back then, we put 10, 15 trips into the wilderness. We had one vehicle, the Green Monster. We put over 90 trips into the wilderness.
Right.
Now. We have a whole fleet.
Right.
So all the logistics that go behind that, all the risk that's behind that, it's just a different world. And it requires us to run this organization in a very professional way. It's too big for one person. It requires tremendous governance from our boards, and it requires tremendous leadership from our team. And
well, they're booming. I mean, if the physical structures of Ogeechee and Kooch are, Kooch's been there a while. Ogeechee, I mean, but and the kids and the numbers, it's all booming. We know it's booming. They're both very, very, very strong, attracting great staff, great kids, a lot of kids. And along with that, and I coached for many years, Hugh, at the college level. And when I got out of coaching in 2009 to go try to do something new, there was a legendary coach in our league that looked at me and couldn't believe I was leaving, and said, Jeff, there's one very few things in life while you're living that are guarantees, but one of them is it's going to change. And there's been a couple of changes for us. I mean, it's going to happen, like you said. I mean, it's the world we're in today, and even to have a camp moving, I mean, to run a camp in today's world, it's got to be. I can't even imagine how difficult that is from a legal standpoint, from a liability standpoint. But we've had to make a big change from the history with the Native American program. And, I just want to give you some time to go into there. Obviously that was important to both you and I. We loved it. We honored it. It was great. But, for those that don't understand why this had to happen, I think it's great that they do understand. As much as I loved it, I completely understand what you were dealing with.
Yeah. Well, one, thank you for asking me that. and I would like to speak to it. Um, and it's, to be honest, it's a really tough subject. It's very personal to me. Um, as I've referenced several times over the course of this, that John was a tremendous influence in my life. Um, and to think that, it sort of rests on my shoulders to make some of these changes now, it's hard. And so to go back to some context around that, because I really want people to understand that by no means was this a knee jerk reaction. No, by no means was it just my decision. Um, but if you put it into context, it's been at least 10 years now that we have struggled with some aspects of our native program, not all of them, and certainly not the values behind them. That'll never go away. That is the connection and the soul of Kooching. I can tell you that growing up as a kid, I grew up in a very mixed, sort of goofy religious household, and it wasn't until I came to Kooching that I really understood, kind of what religion and spirituality meant for me, and the connection to the land, and how our native program interfaced with
No
our
doubt.
tripping program. And that meant so much. In fact, it wasn't until my wife Alice came to camp years later that she said, "I finally get you," when she went on trips and understand just how powerful that connection is. But if you go back 10 years, it was really our own staff at Kooching that first brought this to our attention and said, one summer, it was during preseason, they came to myself and JR and John Great, who's actually celebrating a 95th birthday
God love him.
in about 10 days. And what an amazing person. But John always has been our Native American expert, advisor, artist, all of it. They came to us and said, "Hey, we're not comfortable wearing wigs anymore. This doesn't feel right. It feels like a costume." And even that at the time was like, what? This is what we had always done, right? It never seemed out of place or inappropriate in any way. And we kind of fought it a little bit in the beginning. And then they really put their foot down and said, "Hey, we're not comfortable with this, and we're not going to dance if we have to keep wearing these wigs." And we ultimately saw their point, and we made that change. And, a couple years later, no one thought the wiser of it. Fast forward another couple years, and we were continuing to get just people question, what we were doing and how we were doing it. And it was coming from all over. And so John and I came up with the idea to hold a couple just councils, essentially, kind of roundtables at camp during preseason, and invite a number of Ojibwe educators and scholars and leaders to camp and just talk about what we were doing and how we were doing it, and get their feedback and listen to them. And that kind of started that process. And then from there, we continued to do some outreach and got some feedback. And one of the hardest ones that we got, and this was right during the COVID time, and this was just direct feedback that we got on our honor society Meday. We had some people in that essentially brought to our attention that, if you go into Ojibwe culture and history, the Medeawan and the Medeawan Society is a religious order. It's not a secret society. It's a religious order. And there are 6 levels of Meday to become a 6th-level Medeawan priest. And we were given direct feedback on that there wasn't probably anything more, I guess, to say it, offensive than using that word, that name. The Honor Society itself and all it stands for, and the service, which is, I know is the most important part of it. That's all great. And the initiation and everything that goes in the ceremony, fine. But just the use of the name, and so just change the name. And also the giving of Indian names is another very sacred honor within the Ojibwe culture. So the giving away of Indian names is, just felt really, really wrong. And I can tell you a personal story. The gentleman who was on our board for a number of years, his name is Dennis Jones. His Ojibwe name is Pebam Amenes, and refers to himself as Pebam the Bomb. Really, really great guy, quite funny. we were over at the Oberholzer Foundation. He's on the board of the Oberholzer Foundation as well, or he was. And I was telling him all about our Medeoan society. And he's just listening to me as he does. And he looks me straight in the face and says, "So are you a Medeoan?" And I kind of gulped. And to this day, I wish that I had answered this differently. And kind of under my breath, I said, yeah. And he said, okay. And 6 months later, when we got back together to talk more about this, I said, hey, I want to just tell you something. I really regret, or I wish I had answered that question differently, because obviously in your society, I'm not a Medeoan. I'm not anywhere close to a Medeoan. And he looked at me and he said, in your society, you are. And that, I mean, that just, to me, showed the gratitude and the grace that he had for our honor society, what it stood for. But I knew it was time to change it. And so we pivoted to that. We put a committee together, and we ultimately came up with a Latin phrase, ad aspera ad astra, which means through adversity to the stars. Mm-hmm. And we thought that that was a great representation of what the Honor Society stands for. So it's now called the Grand Honor of the Astra. And I can tell you that for folks, and I get it. Look, I mean, people are 2, 3, 4 steps removed from all of this, and they're wondering what's going on, and things are changing. And is it still the same? And is it still as hard and all that, this and that, whatever else? But I've said this a couple of times. Last summer, I watched Henry Vandenberg make Astra, and I watched Charlie Heinley not. And I can tell you how much it meant to Charlie just by watching it, how hard it was for him to sit there and watch his best friend he was so proud of who made it, but he didn't. So for anybody to suggest that it doesn't mean as much, or it's not as hard, or it's not the same, come on up, because that's not correct.
Right.
And so every kid that goes through that place dreams of having their name on the wall. Mm-hmm. And they still do. And it still means just as much. It is just as powerful. So that was another step, Jeff. And then, as we continued on this journey, one of the things we were advised to do was just to continue to reach out to Ojibwe elders and scholars in our community, in our area, in the Rainy River District, and get their opinion and their advice, and try to get them more involved and become, the way it was phrased to us, more Native-led than Native-inspired. And we've done that. We did that. But one particular moment that I never forget was we had these Ojibwe scholars in to observe Grand Council. And I know you know this. I mean, this is something that we've done over the years, and we've gone out. Back in Holden's time, they would go visit in the reservations. That's not really something that we're able to do anymore. But they would invite folks in. That's not always as easy as said as done. But we had these folks in, and I stood outside the council ring as they watched Grand Council, and I watched them watch Grand Council. And it was really painful, because I could just see the reactions in their faces. Some of it was anger, and some of it was just really, deep hurt and tears. And the next morning we got together over at the Oberholzer Foundation again with Paybom, and he led a ceremony where we all shared that experience. I was there, JR was there, John Great, Ryan London, who was the board chair at the time, as they expressed how difficult it was for them to watch what they had watched. And they were very respectful in what they said, expressed that it's very obvious that what you're doing, you're trying to do it with as much honor and respect as you can. We see that, but it's not your culture to share. It's not yours. And as much as you can take this in, respect that, dancing and drumming is a very spiritual part of Ojibwe culture, and it's ours. And it's not yours. And so recognize and realize that so much has been taken from us over many, 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 many centuries, and a lot of pain and a lot of harm and a lot of trauma. And watching that just reinforces that and brings it back up. I know that's really hard for folks to hear, because, we think of it as we are trying to honor and respect and always have is,
That's right.
with everything we've ever done. That was Mason's whole intent. He's recorded in his books. But when you hear it firsthand, and I've heard it now too many times, I can't say it any other way, but it's just simply the right thing to do.
Well,
it is simply the right thing to do.
It could be different too. I mean, I'm not in those meetings, and I had a talk with Jim Shook, and he was asking me about it a summer or two ago, and I said, Jim, look, on the outside looking in, you know how much I love the Native American part of this. I mean, it's in my blood so deep. Yeah, I don't want it to happen, but I'm not in those meetings. I'm not hearing what's going on. I can sit on the outside and point fingers, but I don't know. But I think, Hugh, from what I'm hearing, what I can gather and piece together, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Mason and Holden had a different relationship with maybe the people in the area back then, as far as the Native Americans in the area back then. From John Netlake, you name it. We all heard the story about the roach. Now we're dealing with a different group of people that have a different view of it. It's a different world now.
Well,
they look at it a little bit differently than what they looked at it back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, so to speak. And I'm guessing,
I think that they do look at differently. I think also, to be fair, they have the courage now to express it and to speak up and have more voice and agency than they ever did. And it's just, if we truly, truly want to honor them, then we have to be willing to listen. And I don't know that we always have, or that we really think we're doing anything wrong. And I get that, and I understand that. And believe you me, making this decision, and it certainly has absolutely the unanimous support of the board, but it's heavy.
Sure.
I don't want to make this decision, Jeff.
No.
It's sad. It's sad, and I'll never say it's not, and it's disappointing. But I go back to two things. One, I know it's the right thing to do, but more importantly, let's talk about where it goes.
Yes, exactly. I was going to get to that next.
That's really, and I want to start by saying that, dancing and wearing the regalia, grand council, that is the outward expression. That's the artistic expression of the values that we hold so dear. That starts with the Law of the Woods. And just to be clear, the Law of the Woods is not a native doctrine. It came out of Ernest Thompson Seton. That's not native by any stretch. Mason adopted it from there. But those values that are expressed in the Law of the Woods, that really truly speak to how we not just honor this culture, but also how we view the land and how we view the earth and all the respect that comes with that. That's not going anywhere. That connection, that aspect of it is more powerful than ever. And I think that's really our challenge now, is to figure out, okay, how do we represent it in a different way? Mm-hmm. And I think that starts just with really digging deeper into our tripping program. We're a tripping camp. Go back to Holden again. Camp Kooch, a wilderness quest. You remember that. They branded that back in the 70s. We've always, first and foremost, been a tripping camp. We were a football camp way back, but we went from that. When Mason and Holden came in, it was the tripping that really changed. And that was really, the impetus for making Kooch what it is today. So what I am hoping that we're going to focus on is just how do we take our tripping program deeper in terms of the values we're talking about. As an example, how many times have I heard from alumni, gosh, I wish I knew more about the routes that we went on and where we went and the history behind it. So there's a great opportunity there to really dig into that more. Our woodsmanship program, we can dig deeper and deeper. Same thing with our crafts in terms of, really exploring, native traditions and concepts behind that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that at all. Mm-hmm. Again, the performance piece, that's something that, is really challenging. But just figuring out how to honor those values even better and do it in a deeper way and relate that back to our tripping program, to me, that's where I think the opportunity is. And then we have to get creative and we have to think, okay, how do we turn that into a celebration? How do we turn that into a ceremony? What does that actually look like? And be honest, I don't know yet. That's going to take a lot of creative thought, but Mason did it, Holden did it. So,
Right.
that's our challenge today. And we have a lot of creative individuals in this organization. And I know we may not get it right out of the gate, but I know we'll get there. And I'd like to think a few years down the road, no one will even be the wiser. I mean, okay, well, this is now the modern program. This is now how we represent those values, and they mean as much as ever. And just take that on and see where it goes. And so I think it's a great opportunity for current leadership coming in and the leadership that's there now to get involved in that. So much of leadership is really, as you said earlier, is, how do you lead through change? That's called change management. And whether we're talking about, the kid who's had a Red Lodge or the unit head or just the cabin staff guy and on up into senior leadership, and there's an opportunity for everybody to get involved in that and really come up with something that's going to be powerful, that's going to resonate. And we'll all look back on this 5 or 10 years and go, look what we did. Look what we created.
Right.
And take it positive versus kind of having one foot back in the old way and saying, okay, well, we're missing out or we're losing out or it's not going to be as good. Cause I think it's going to be great. It's just going to be different.
Yeah. Well, I know, Hugh, in your position that's not an easy spot. And, I know how much, I know what we grew up with up there and how important that was. And it's tough, I'm sure, for some of the old timers to see the change. And I just hope they understand that this was a difficult thing and you try to see it through a different set of eyes. None of us, including you, really wanted to have to make that decision. But, I think if they would have heard everything, and I asked you this question, I remember talking to you, I said, Hugh, was this one or two people? And you said, Jeff, no, there was like 7 different groups around the area, tribes, groups, whatever, that you went to every one of them, and every one of them had the same exact comment back to you that, hey, this is not good. Basically, we never thought that way. We never tried to do anything to hurt them. That's for sure, to disrespect them. But it is what it is. And if that's how they feel, that's how they feel. And, we'll put our best foot forward and this is still a great place with some great people. And I think everybody understands that.
I also have to acknowledge that it's, it takes time for people to process this. I've been living and dealing with this now for a number of years. And so when you hear it firsthand, I mean, I've talked to a lot of people already and they're like, wow, I mean, that's a gut punch. Wow, that's really sad. It takes time. It takes time to absorb it. And frankly, part of it is also the unknown. Like you don't know where it's going to go. You don't know what it's going to be. And so I think until we get there, it's going to take people time to process through that. And, and I respect that. I'm not trying to change anybody's mind or opinion or tell them that they're wrong. I mean, or tell them what we used to do is wrong, because that's not the case at all.
No.
By any means. But it's the right thing to do. It's time to move forward, and we'll do that in a great way. I mean,
I think this started even before you. I mean, talking to Steve Heinley, he and I talked about it the other day, and he had mentioned, he said, Coles, he said, listen, back in the early 2000s when I was in this, we were getting calls starting up. So this has been going on for a while. The calls started a long time ago, 25 plus years ago.
No,
questioning,
that's right.
And we've been trying to keep it there as long as we have. And it is what it is, but hey, that's why the good Lord put eyes in the front of our head for a reason. We're going to keep moving forward here.
Another way to say it or think about it, and this kind of relates to, the other part of the organization now, which is just as vibrant as anything, and that's our urban program, which I want to touch on a little bit, is that we are a microcosm of society. I referenced way back when, we were isolated up there. We were a bubble.
Yeah.
We are the farthest thing from a bubble anymore. I mean, we have influences from every direction. We have challenges from every direction. And so, we truly are a microcosm of society in every way, shape, and form. And we do the absolute best that we can to keep a lot of aspects of that out. You know that. I mean, we've always said that. I mean, at camp, it's just about camp. And one thing that you and I haven't talked a whole lot about or just said, and you know this as well as anyone, camp has always been about fun.
Yeah.
It's always been about fun. If it's
Period.
not fun, then kids aren't coming back. So for the kids, all this stuff is in the background. Want to make it as fun and as powerful, as impactful. And, I can speak to that firsthand with my 3 kids at camp, and my wife. I mean, camp is more meaningful than ever. It's more impactful than ever. Kids need this more than ever. Their disconnected nature, their addiction to screens, or their overuse of screens and everything, overscheduling. Parents, we think of it as a reset. I know that's how we look at it. And so it's so powerful. And I think one thing that, I'm particularly proud of, and I can speak for others in this regard, is, how we've expanded camp, both up at camp and then also through our urban program, just to reach that many more kids.
Yeah.
We have an amazing scholarship program now up at camp, between Kooch and Gitche, close to 100 kids that are on some form of scholarship. And then with our urban program, which we started now, it's been about 13 years, we are serving between Cincinnati and Minneapolis and some outer cities, 4,000 kids a year. And these are all kids that would hardly ever get this type of opportunity. For those that don't know a lot about this program, it's probably 15 years ago now that I went to the board and kind of just threw out this idea of, hey, how do we export the magic of the North Woods to an urban environment? What would that look like? Why do we have to bring kids all the way up here and into Canada for them to have a similar experience, even if it's in a shortened form? And I'd be a liar if I sat here and told you I had it all figured out back then. I didn't by any means. I had a vision. I had an idea. And I think back to the beginning and all the folks that were involved in developing that, starting, all the various program directors from Melinda Roscoe, now Melinda Bowers, to Kit Summers and Susie Jolly, and now Trace Dunning, who has just taken the program to another level. It's been amazing to watch how this has developed, and the impact that it has. And, through Urban Wilderness, we get kids up to camp.
Mhm.
We get them to Owakonzie, our outpost. And, Steve Sullivan, I know Sully said this to me when we were first starting this program. He's like, I don't get it. Like, we're taking kids out for a day or so, on the Ohio River or the Little Miami. And, how's that going to be impactful? And, he was driving the bus for us back then, to get the kids out. And I remember the very first trip we did down the Ohio, and, you drop the kids off, and these kids, most of them have never been in a canoe. They've never been on the water. They're nervous as hell. They're shaking like a leaf.
Right.
And we load them up, and then, they come back at the end of the day, and Sully looks at me. He's like, it's just like camp, man. It's just like returning from a trip. I mean, it's just as impactful in one day with these kids as it is for, what we do up at camp for 10 days or 2 weeks or more. So it's,
and it gets a little taste in their mouth to want them to keep going further. There's more to this, I want to see what's further down the road to do more of this, but it gives them just enough. And I've seen all the notes in the office on the board. It's just amazing the number of kids that write thank you notes to you guys for this program. It's a great thing.
It is. And, one of the great aspects of this program, that I was hoping for, again, didn't know if it would evolve this way, but we now have more people, more staff working in Urban Wilderness full time than we do the rest of the off-season leadership team. With all that we're serving, both in Minneapolis, and Cincinnati. And what's so impactful about that is that all those individuals who are key summer leaders are at camp in the summertime. And these are all people that we wouldn't normally be able to retain. They'd already be off, doing their own thing, and we've been able to keep them. And they're excellent at what they do. And we've got outdoor program people. We've got Maddie Anderson, who's a fabulous grant writer, the Dunning brothers, on and on and on. Abby Aaron up in Minneapolis, and to go into the schools and watch these guys teach these kids how to make a handmade canoe, and it's just a great STEM project, and
Yeah.
teachers eat it up. It's really powerful to see it, to watch, and to see how we've been able to expand that. So that's, it kind of goes back to your point about the complexity of this place, but it's all for the better. And I'd be remiss if I didn't sit here and give it just a tremendous thanks to all the alumni out there that support this place. You know how tough that is. You've been in a development role,
Yeah.
good number of years now, and you never take that for granted, right? I mean, that's just, it doesn't matter the amount whatsoever. It's back to Tim's phrase, many hands make light work. And it's been an amazing journey to evolve that and to be where we are now with that type of support. It's what makes this whole thing go. And
no doubt.
Without it, we wouldn't be here.
That's right.
So.
And as I've reconnected with people, Hugh, and I've talked to them, I said, look, there's been a lot of people before us that gave their time and their talent and their treasure so that we can enjoy camp our years. It's our turn to step up now to keep this thing going. So many kids are relying on us. So, and that really hit home with them. And that's why I'm so grateful, Hugh, that you've allowed me to come back and be a small part of the organization and just, getting re-engaging with our alumni. And I've been loving every second of it, and really, really, really look forward to getting people from our era back involved and to tell the stories that we've had. And, it's going to be great. So, as we wrap this up, is there anything else that you'd like to share or show or tell or that you want to talk about?
3 little things come to mind.
Okay.
One is when I was a first-year senior working on my then Midday project, and I was replacing one of the, at that time, wooden basketball stanchions.
Yes.
And I had no idea what I was getting myself into with this project. And as I dug deeper and deeper and deeper, eventually hit water. I was over my head. And as you know, you got to walk by the basketball court to get to the dining hall, and John Holden's cabin is right there. And every day he'd walk by me and he'd, kind of look at it. And, John hardly ever said anything. I'm convinced to this day, my one regret is I didn't know John as an older person, because I always wanted to ask him, what was the secret behind, his silence and his strength. And I'm convinced it was the pipe, and that he had that pipe in his mouth so he wouldn't say anything and he'd just bite down on it, right? So every day he walks by and I'm getting deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And literally it's at one point I'm over my head. And one morning he's walking by and he stops and he looks down, and I am literally over my head now. And he hadn't said a word. He looks down and he takes his pipe out. He's like, "That's one hell of a hole." And that's all he said. And he walked on. So, that's one. Two, one of the best trips I ever took was the Seal River. And I know that so many have. And, you come into my house, you see books about polar bears all over the place.
Yeah.
Because I had a couple encounters on that trip.
Oh, yeah.
And that's something I will never, ever forget as long as I live, paddling across the bay and, coming close with some of those encounters. That just really speaks to the influence and the magnitude of being out there and the power of nature, which, there's nothing that replaces that. And then lastly, Jeff, I just want to share one thing too. I think that we're going through some leadership changes.
Yep.
It's a moment in time. This place is not static. It does move forward. We've had an amazing amount of people that have been involved in this place, whether you're talking about a cabin staff person, you're talking about someone that's helping in the kitchen, you're talking about leadership, and certainly up to the director roles. And had the good fortune of knowing most of them. And I just want to acknowledge the tremendous service and work and gift that both J. Arbor Camp and Johanna Ernst have given to this place over the years. They will leave a legacy that is really powerful. I don't know who was it first said, if it was Holden or maybe even back to Vance, who said, always leave the campsite better than you found it.
Yeah.
And I think both of those two have done that. and I just want to acknowledge what they've done, and I want to wish them well in their new pursuit, and just thank them.
Yep. Great. Great. Well, Hugh, thanks for everything, man. I mean, I think what you've done with this place and what you've built at this point is just amazing. You know, I think you've got us aligned in a safe place for in a not an easy time to run a camp. You know, but I know we talk quite a bit, and the capacity of the things that you're dealing with is just tremendous. I feel, you know, of what's on your plate, and personally, I want to thank. I know on behalf of everybody involved with the camps that we can have a place like this. Thanks for all your efforts and all you deal with. And I know it's not easy some days, but we appreciate you hanging tough, and, you know, can't wait to catch up with you again here soon.
Hey, it's an honor, and I'm blessed. My family's blessed. And thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate it, man.
All right. Thanks again.